The GOP's secret agenda for America's future. And, you know, what I'm really talking about in this op-ed is that there's basically, you know, we use these words like, you know, authoritarian or fascist or Christian nationalist or whatever. And for most Americans, these words have no meaning. So what is, you know, how do you describe the kind of government that Republicans are pushing for? Project 2025 is calling for that the 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court just set up for Donald Trump if he becomes president. What do you call that? And I call it a kingdom. Kingdoms are the second oldest form of governance among human beings, the oldest being democratic governance, which is how most tribes were governed for, you know, hundreds of thousands of years. But kingdoms, and I reference Charles Dickens in A Christmas Carol, how he talked about how in a kingdom, you know, and I realize there are modern kingdoms that kind of break this rule, including the United Kingdom, but I'm not talking about Trump trying to turn the United States into modern, you know, Denmark or UK. He's trying to turn the United States into Victorian era England, 1840s England, which is when Charles Dickens wrote Christmas Carol. And in that kind of a system, you have basically, you know, there's the very rich, there's the middle class, and there's the working poor. And in that kind of a system, 95% of the people are the working poor. The middle class is only 3 or 4% of the population. It's made up of the doctors and lawyers and small business people like Scrooge. Ebenezer Scrooge was a small businessman. His company was so small he only had 1 employee. I mean, he was a very small businessman. That was the middle class back then. 95% of all the working people were the working poor. And then, of course, you had the top 1%, which was the royal family and all the people associated with them. And my point is that this is what Republicans have been trying to bring back to America for 43 years now. When Reagan became president, about 2/3 of us were in the middle class in America. Fewer than 1/3 of Americans were the working poor. Today, about half of Americans are the working poor, and fewer than half of us are in the middle class any longer. That's the result of 43 years of Reaganomics. Or, you know, I suppose you could argue 40 years of Reaganomics, because Joe Biden really shifted the gears on this stuff 3 years ago. So I think it's important that we just make it very, very clear what the GOP's agenda is. It's being driven by right-wing billionaires who don't want to pay their taxes. It's all about, you know, making America safe for right-wing billionaires. People like Elon Musk, who just announced, if the reports are accurate, that he's going to give $45 million a month to Donald Trump's campaign. You know, a loophole that was created by the Supreme Court, by the way, allowing that to happen. This is the result of the Citizens United decision in 2010 that created PACs and super PACs. And it's no way to run a government. And frankly, I don't think it's what most Americans want. You know, in these old-timey kingdoms, you know, you didn't have public schools. Only the very rich went to school. If somebody got sick, it would wipe out their families. I mean, you know, to a large extent, America's like that right now. You know, Dickens's father went to debtor's prison. You know, if somebody gets sick, it wipes out the family. They're in debt, I'd say. Meanwhile, you've got the Lord Mayors, you know, with their giant manor houses and their 50 cooks and butlers. The 1% of the Victorian era who are doing what they do. Adam Young, back in 1791, English economist, he wrote, "The nobility and clergy have for centuries been exempted from taxation. The nobles and clergy, by their privileges and exemption from taxes, through all the weight of the state expenses on the people." Right, and here we are. I mean, you know, this is the change that has happened. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to John Adams. Now, Jefferson, keep in mind, died in bankruptcy. He was not a rich guy. You know, although he was richer than the average working person at the time because he had a fair amount of land, and he owned a bunch of people, which is pretty gruesome, but nonetheless, he died in bankruptcy. And he was writing to John Adams, who was a lifelong member of the middle class. In 1814, he said, again, talking about the rich, he said, you might as well, with the sailors, whistle to the wind as suggest precautions against having too much money. We must scud then before the gale and try to hold fast ourselves by some plank of the wreck. I mean, this was, how our founders, this is the guy who not only wrote the Declaration of Independence, but also wrote the document that became the statement of purpose for the French Revolution as well, and the first draft of the Bill of Rights. And just looking at this and saying, the right-wing billionaires want to turn America into that world that Charles Dickens wrote about, back in the 1840s. And it's not right. It's not a good thing. It's not what America wants, frankly, and it's not certainly what we should want. So just wanted to be on the record with that. Our last chance to rescue democracy may be this November, so vote. I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Private Medicare plans, Medicare Advantage, producing a pile of cash for a small handful of companies. I'll tell you about that after the break.